Hi everyone, welcome back to CFI Helper. Today we're going to be covering the factors that affect VMC. And this is important to know and understand because you're most likely going to be getting asked these questions on your multi-engine check ride. So let's get started, but before we begin, I just want to quickly remind you, if you're able to subscribe to my channel. It'll be super helpful and I can make more videos like these in the future. So yeah, let's get into it. So I have all of the factors written down here and we're going to go through all of them. But before we do that, I just want to briefly define what VMC is. So VMC is the minimum speed at which you can maintain a directional control with the critical engine inoperable. Okay, so usually with our critical engine being the left engine, and it's important to keep in mind the word directional, because the way we can maintain directional control in this case is mostly going to be with use of rudder. And you'll notice as we go through these that almost all of these factors tie into our use of rudder. But something else I really want to quickly mention that used to help me in figuring these out is whenever VMC increases, it makes it harder for us to maintain directional control. Okay, so I'll just write harder here. Whereas when VMC decreases, it's easier for us to maintain directional control. Okay, so I just want you to keep these in mind. It might help you out a bit as we're going through all of the factors. So let's start with power. What happens when we increase power? When we increase power on our plane, we're also increasing something else. We're increasing thrust, right? So with an increase in power, we're going to get an increase in thrust. And let me draw this out so that you can kind of visualize this a little better here. Okay, so let's talk about what the thrust would look like with full power. Okay, so we've applied full power, and let's say we're getting full thrust. Okay, so we're getting a lot of thrust. This blue line is our thrust. With that thrust, we're also going to be getting something else, right? We do have the yaw from the left engine already, but we're also going to be getting yaw from this thrust. So this is going to be our yaw, okay? So we have a lot of thrust and a lot of yaw. Whereas this plane, using less power, is going to be producing less thrust, right? So as you can see here, this thrust is much less than the plane with full power. And because of that, we're also going to be creating less yaw. Okay, so this time, let's say this is our yaw. So now you can already see with full power, with an increase in power, we're increasing thrust and we're increasing yaw. So when we're increasing yaw, what do we have to do to maintain directional control? We're going to need to increase our use of rudder, right? But when we increase our use of rudder, we're leaving less rudder available to the pilot. So because we have less rudder available, our VMC, the minimum speed at which we can maintain directional control, is going to increase, right? As we increase power and we're increasing our use of rudder, we're leaving less rudder available to us to help us maintain directional control. So because of this, it's going to be harder for us to maintain directional control in a way. So for this one here, as power increases, your VMC is also going to increase, okay? For density altitude, we need to think about what else is happening when density altitude increases. So let's say density altitude increases, you may also get an increase in temperature, right? Or a decrease in pressure, or you might get an increase in humidity. So when all these things happen, what have we learned about the engine output? We've learned that your engine produces less thrust. Your engine output is going to be less, right? So now you have less engine output, meaning you're going to be producing less thrust. If you're producing less thrust, what else does that mean? It means you're going to have less yaw to counteract, okay? So because of that, you don't need to use as much rudder. And you're leaving more rudder available to yourself, to the pilot. You have a better chance of maintaining directional control. So as density altitude increases, your VMC will decrease. Let's move on to C of G. I'm going to draw just a small diagram here again for this one. So let's say this is going to be a drawing for a forward and aft C of G. Okay, so once again, our left engine is inoperable. For the forward C of G, we're going to be comparing this to where the C of G is and where the rudder is, okay? So for example, let's say forward C of G is over here and rudder is back here. And this is going to be your arm, okay? This is the arm from C of G to the rudder. Whereas, and I'm going to exaggerate this one a little bit so it's more obvious, but let's say aft C of G is over here. And this is your arm now. What do you notice between the difference in the distance between the C of G and the rudder here versus the C of G and the rudder here? In this example, you have a longer arm, and in this example, you have a shorter arm. With a longer arm, and again, always ties back to the rudder here, your rudder is more effective. Whereas in this case, with the shorter arm, your rudder is less effective. And this can be a little hard to understand. So let me just use an example of like a door, okay? So let's say this is your door here. This is going to be our handle, and this is going to be our hinges here. I want you to think about what it's like when you try to push open that door. Let's say you tried to push close to the hinges right here. It's going to be harder to open that door, and it's going to be less effective, right? Versus if you tried to push it near the door handle over here, it's going to be a lot easier to push open that door. And again, you can kind of visualize this with the arm here. That's the arm from the hinges to just before the door handle. And then this will be the arm from the hinges to basically the other side of the door. So when the arm is shorter, it's less effective and harder to maintain control. Whereas when it's longer, it's more effective and easier to maintain control. So in our case here, I'll just write it here. When you have a forward center of gravity, your VMC decreases. Let's move on to gear down. This one is actually a lot more simple to understand. Basically, think about what's happening when the gear comes down. When it comes down, it's stabilizing the aircraft, and it kind of acts like the keel of a boat, okay? So when it's acting like the keel of a boat, it's resisting sideways motion. So again, when the gear comes down, it's stabilizing your aircraft. In a way, it's going to help you. You're not going to have as much yaw when this happens, right? So because of that, is that going to make it easier or harder for you to maintain directional control? It's going to make it easier, right? So in this example, therefore, when your gear is down, VMC decreases. It's going to be easier for you to maintain directional control. Let's move on to the prop. So let's talk about two situations that can happen here, right? We're going to compare between a windmilling and a feathered prop. Okay, these are horrendous pictures, but it's going to explain the point I'm trying to make here. When you're looking at a windmilling prop versus a feathered prop, what do you see? The windmilling prop is going to have a lot more drag, right? So let's write that. So this one is going to have an increase in drag. And because of that, what else are you going to create? You're going to create yaw, right? Versus the feathered prop, you're going to have less drag. So you're going to be creating less yaw. And when you create less yaw, you don't need to use as much rudder, right? However, in this case, with a windmilled prop, when you're creating more yaw, you're going to need to use more rudder, meaning there's going to be less rudder available to you as the pilot. So, in this case, if there's less rudder available to you, is this going to make it easier or harder for you to maintain directional control? It's going to make it harder, okay? So, in this case, a windmilling prop is going to lead to VMC increasing. Our next example is having your flaps down. Okay, so we know that when flaps are down, we increase lift, but we also increase drag. Okay, so one thing though about the flaps is when we put those flaps down, we're actually having accelerated flow over the wing. And that accelerated flow is creating drag. Okay, so when we extend flaps, we're going to get accelerated flow. And this accelerated flow is actually going to help us oppose that yaw from the inoperative engine. So because this accelerated flow is helping us oppose the yaw, is this going to make it harder or easier for us to maintain directional control? It's going to make it easier. Now, when we put those flaps down, it doesn't just magically yaw us all the way to the right, but it's going to help reduce a bit of the left yawing tendency that we were getting. So you're obviously still going to be applying your rudder inputs, but the flaps are going to help reduce a bit of that left yawing tendency from that inoperative engine. Because it's making it easier for us to maintain directional control, when the flaps are down, our VMC decreases. Okay? And you can think about it again in the way that when our flaps are down, it's going to be a little easier for us to maintain directional control, so our VMC speed is going to decrease. And then let's go through weight really quickly. We know that if we have a plane that weighs 200 pounds and this is pulling us down, we're going to need 200 pounds of lift acting in the opposite direction in order for us to fly. However, there's actually a benefit to this weight when it comes to VMC, because when you start to bank, this 200 pounds here gets split into two components. It's going to get split into a horizontal and vertical component. So you'll have some lift acting in this direction and some lift acting in that direction. Some of this horizontal lift here is going to help us oppose some of the yaw. When you have an increase in weight, you're going to have an increase in horizontal lift. And this horizontal lift here can be used with the rudder to oppose the turn, right? So because of that, because we have some of that horizontal lift to help, we're actually leaving more rudder available to the pilot. As you can see here, we came right back to the talk of rudder. Because we're going to have more rudder available to the pilot with that horizontal lift component, do you think our VMC is going to increase or decrease? Is it going to be harder or easier for us to maintain directional control? And in our case here, and always, with an increase in weight, your VMC is going to decrease. And finally, we're going to talk about our 5-degree angle of bank. When you have that 5-degree angle of bank, it honestly kind of ties up to the example up above. We already kind of talked about what happens with lift when we bank and how it gets split into a horizontal and vertical component. So when we bank 5 degrees, we are increasing what? What type of lift? Horizontal lift, right? So we're increasing our horizontal lift, and then once again, when we're using this in combination with rudder, this horizontal lift component is helping us use less rudder, meaning we're leaving more rudder available to the pilot. And so I think you can kind of see where this is going, but with that 5-degree angle of bank, our VMC is going to decrease. It's going to be easier for us to maintain directional control, so our VMC speed will decrease. I hope this video was helpful. I tried to fit all of it down on one page because I personally as a student found it easier when everything was just right in front of me. And if you have any questions and you'd like me to expand on something, please let me know below. I will take any questions or feedback. But yeah, I hope this video was helpful for you. If you can, subscribe, like, comment, share this with a friend, and I'll see you guys in the next video.